Hi, I'm Mike Kinderer, Technical Product Specialist. Today we're going to cover brake pad and rotor installation on this Lexus RX vehicle. Today I'm going to be using the Wagner product. We're going to be using the Wagner OEX brake pad. So some features about this brake pad. This is ceramic, so the full line of OEX is ceramic, and it also has custom shapes and slot designs. So the feature about the custom shape and slot designs, we get airflow through the brake pad. When we think about brake pads, how they work is they work by creating friction. Friction means what? A lot of heat. So if we control the heat, we control the performance of that brake pad. So Wagner, what they did is they put these custom slots in. What the slots allow is we get airflow going through this brake pad during operation. So if we create airflow through the brake pad, we control that heat, we optimize performance. Not only do we optimize performance, we also optimize pad life. Another feature about these brake pads, they all come with the hardware in the box, ready to install. So anytime we do brake pads, we need to replace the hardware. I'm going to show you where that hardware goes. So brake pads, and then the rotor we're going to be using is going to be the Wagner E-Shield rotor. So some features about this rotor is it does come sealed in a bag out of the box. We still need to wash it, but it does come in a vapor corrosion inhibitor bag. It does have the E-Shield coating on it. What the E-Shield coating does, it helps cut down on corrosion buildup over time, right? We think about this, we get a lot of rust buildup. This is what we call the hat of the rotor, the part that mounts to the wheel. And then also, you can see the coating comes all the way up through the venting area. So again, optimize rust corrosion protection everywhere except for obviously the braking surface, because that's the part that the brake pads are actually going to engage with to slow the car down. So we talked about the pads, we talked about the rotor, but like I said, every rotor that goes on a vehicle, we need to wash it. We need to wash it with soap and water. I know for a lot of years and a lot of times people want to use brake cleaner. Why we don't want to use brake cleaner is during the machining process, as this rotor is machined, you get tiny little bits of metal that will hide out in this friction plate, this braking plate. And what happens is the brake cleaner doesn't wash out all that metal debris. What happens, that metal debris, if it doesn't get washed off this brand new rotor, guess where it ends up? It's now going to end up in this brand new brake pad upon initial installation. We get those little fine rotor fragments in this friction material. Now we get a brake noise issue. So again, we want to make sure that we wash this rotor before we put it on. So I'm going to go wash this rotor, and then we're going to get ready to install it on the vehicle. Okay, so as you can see, we got the rotor wash. So we think about washing. The other thing the washing does is also when they ship this rotor, they will put some slight coating of oil on the friction surface to stop any rust buildup until it gets installed on the vehicle. So that's the other reason why we need to make sure we washed it. So I went ahead and washed it, soap and water, just some Dawn dish soap, nothing fancy. We just want to cut through the oil grease, get the metal off. So after we wash it, we're going to rinse it, then we're going to blow it dry to remove all the excessive water. So we can see rotor's all nice and clean, ready to go back on. Now, one more step we've got to think about before we put this rotor on, and that's on the vehicle. We can see on this hub surface that we talked about, we see we've got some rust buildup. So again, we want to make sure that this hub is clean, because as that rotor mounts flush to this hub, any rust buildup is going to could cause what we call runout. Excessive runout could give you a brake pulsation. Brake pulsation is when you're trying to stop your vehicle and you got that brake pedal kind of hammering at the bottom of your foot. So one potential we want to make sure that we eliminate as a possible cause is going to be rust buildup. So I'm going to get my wire wheel on my air tool, and we're going to clean up this hub surface. Okay, so you can see now we've got this hub surface all cleaned up. Now we can go ahead and slide the rotor, and just simply slips over the top of the wheel studs and pilots up on the hub. So, next order of operation. Now we're going to install our caliper bracket. Before we install the bracket, you can see we went ahead and we've got the areas all cleaned up. We're also going to install our caliper hardware, brake pad hardware, before we put the caliper bracket on the vehicle. And that's these pieces right here that we talked about that come shipped in the box. So we're going to remove them from the bag. So before we put the hardware on, what we want to do, and again, to prevent any rust buildup, we need to take some brake lubricant. Here we're going to use Sil Glide brake lubricant. We want to put a little bit of lubricant underneath where this abutment clips go, this caliper brake pad hardware. Just a little bit. We're just going to rub some on these two surfaces here underneath where this brake clip is going to seat, because again, we want to slow down that rust buildup. So put a little bit underneath of it. Now we can go ahead and put our clip on. One side, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Again, it doesn't take much, but just a little bit. Just got to get a little bit more. Now we'll go ahead and install our other clip. Okay. Now, while we have this off, we also now want to put a slight coating on top of the clip as well, because this is where the brake pad is going to sit. So we want that brake pad to slide freely and smoothly in this bracket. So we're going to go ahead and put a little bit on here also before we put it back on the vehicle. And again, same idea, both sides, inside and outside, because again, like as these brake pads wear, we want to make sure that they wear evenly. Now we'll go ahead and flip it upside down, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Now, the other thing we're going to do before we put this bracket back on is we're going to go ahead and get our brake pads started on the bracket. Now, two other pieces that we need to install on the brake, and this goes on the inside brake pad before we put it on the vehicle. This is going to be our wear indicator. What this does is you see this little metal tab when it's clipped onto the brake pad. As the brake pad wears, once it gets down, you can see this clip is designed that this little metal tab will be rubbing up against the rotor. This will give you that really loud, screeching, grinding kind of noise. So this is an indicator, again, it's just before the friction material wears out and gets into that backing plate. Okay, so we talked about the difference between friction material and a new pad and old pad. So we can see here in my right hand, this is the pad that came off this vehicle, and then this is a new pad. So we can see the difference in the friction material. So we talk about how friction material is a wear item. This is what happens over time. Brand new pad that's over half wore out. So we can see over time that this friction material, as you stop your vehicle, is designed to gradually wear away. That's why we put the wear indicator on here. Because again, we need to know before we get to this metal, while there's still a little tiny bit of friction material left on this backing plate, because once we get metal to metal, that's not good. That's literally going to grind away the surface of that rotor. So that's why we put these little wear indicators on the brake pad. Now, with the wear indicator on the brake pad, the material installed on the bracket, this is ready to go on the vehicle. So we're going to start with our outside pad. So it's going to sit on the vehicle about like so. So we're going to put the outside pad in. Now we're going to put the inside pad on. I'm actually going to move the wear indicator because you want the wear indicator is going to go on the bottom of the braking surface. So I need to move this clip. Now we're going to go ahead and put this brake pad on the bracket. And then once we get the brake pad in the bracket, then we're going to put the bracket on the vehicle. Okay, so we got the brake pads installed in the bracket. We've cleaned all the hardware. Caliper slide pins move freely. Now we're going to go ahead and install the assembly onto the vehicle. So this just, again, slides over the top. We've got our caliper hanging here so we don't have any excessive damage to our brake hose. Now we're going to go ahead and get our bolts started. One in the bottom, one in the top. So we got the bottom one started. Now we're going to start the top one. Let me get my ratchet and we'll finish tightening these down. And then we'll go ahead and torque them to specification. Now I can't stress enough the importance on the modern vehicle. We want to make sure everything is torqued to specification. It's not just a matter of tight is good enough anymore. We need to make sure that we're following the manufacturer's recommended torque, which on this vehicle is 77 foot-pounds for the caliper anchor bolts, which are this piece right here. And then we'll also torque the caliper bolts once we get to that step. But first we need to tighten this bracket. So we're going to go ahead and snug them up, both the upper one and then the lower one. All right, I've got them both snug. Now I'm going to switch tools. I'm going to get my torque wrench. I've looked it up. Like I said, this is 77, so I'm going to set my torque wrench to 77 foot-pounds. Now I'm going to go ahead and tighten. Lower. Upper. Now with the bracket installed, we're going to go ahead and push these brake pads all the way in against the rotor. Now, before we can put the caliper onto the vehicle, we need to push the caliper piston back in. Because we can, as we talked about, as this pad wears, as this friction material wears away, this caliper piston needs to start coming out further and further to get adequate pressure pushing that pad against the rotor. So what we need to do is we need to push this caliper piston back into the housing so we have enough clearance to slide the caliper over the top of the brake pads. So I'm going to get my brake pad depressing tool. I'm just going to squeeze it together, which is going to push, as I squeeze it, as you can see, it's going to push that caliper piston back into the housing. And push it in until it bottoms out or it stops, which is right about there. Now I'm going to pull my tool off. So now we can see this is ready to go over the brake pads. So we can see this is what it's going to look like with a brand new set of brake pads. So we've got our full friction material, brand new brake pads. We need to make sure that caliper piston is pushed all the way back in. Now we've got the caliper ready to go over the top of the brake pads. So all it does is simply slides down into position over the top. Now we're going to go ahead and get our caliper to bracket bolts started. Now we're going to torque these to specification as well. These are 25 foot-pounds, so I've got my 3/8 torque wrench. I've got it set, and now we're going to go ahead and torque these. There's one click, so that one's tight. Now we'll go ahead and do the lower one. That one's tight. So with this all put back together, see we've got the caliper back on, the pads on, the new rotor. The last step after we put the wheel back on is we want to make sure we go out and do what we call the burnish or the braking procedure. What that means is this rotor, when it was machined, is machined with a tool we call a brake lathe. The bit on that brake lathe comes to a small point. So as this machine, you can't feel it with your fingers, but if you were to look at that braking surface under a microscope, you'd see a bunch of little peaks and valleys. What the burnish procedure does is we're going to go out and we're going to drive the vehicle. We're just going to use what we call a 30-30-30. What that means is 30 stops with a 30-mile-per-hour change of speed, 30 seconds in between. And what that does is these brand new brake pads, it gets some of that friction material to transfer from that brake pad into the surface of that rotor. It fills in all those peaks and valleys. Now you have a solid surface. This is very noticeable because after you do the brake pads, you'll notice the more times you stop, the firmer the brake pedal feels and the shorter that stopping distance gets. That's because that brake pad is breaking in or mating, getting fully burnished into that rotor. So now we've smoothed out, we've given those brake pads, you're really gripping when you go to stop the vehicle, that complete rotor surface, not just those peaks. You're getting the peaks and the valleys. It's flattening out the surface. So again, after we do the brake job, we put the wheel back on. We want to make sure we do that burnish procedure, 30-30-30, 30-mile-per-hour change of speed, 30 stops with 30 seconds in between, again, to get those brake pads fully meshed into that braking surface. So that's going to, after that burnish procedure, that would truly is the last step. That would conclude the brake job. With that, I thank you for watching.